This world does not comply. Deploy calibration. The command echoed across the elevated chamber of the Vedra Conclave's citadel, where 21 envoys stood in ritual formation, their sensory augmentation rings pulsating with cold sapphire light. High Primarch Saloon didn't wait for consensus. He was already rotating the authorization disk into the command recess. The room adjusted around him. Airflow tightened, screen contrasts surged, and data began threading across the curved tactical slabs behind him. Code spirals, deviation charts, Earth's anomaly index. In orbit over Tarsus V aboard the Conclave's carrier Velith Prime, Tactical Overseer Drawn watched the green indicators pulse along the calibration arc. Target species, Homo sapiens. Classification, volatile non-conforming. His fingers tapped a sequence. 12 obelisks detached from storage chambers, each roughly the size of a heavy-lift cruiser, their outer shells carved with etched harmonics meant to override cultural logic at the mimetic root. The tech beside him glanced at the behavioral report again. 41 planets submitted. This one's erratic. Drawn responded flatly. Then we correct it. On Earth, it was just after 3:00 IEM in Geneva when the obelisks emerged in high orbit. No sonic boom, no flashing entry, just a shift in night satellite reflection patterns. From a mountaintop observatory in Nepal, a junior astrophysicist noticed 12 symmetrical objects forming a geosynchronous array. He logged the anomaly but didn't raise the flag. By the time he uploaded the report, every major observatory on Earth had already been fed false orbital data. That wasn't a Vedra tactic, that was Delphi. 2 decades earlier, the Strategic Autonomy Directive began its work beneath the surface of everyday life, layered into civil infrastructure, embedded in procedural protocols, and quietly rewriting how Earth was observed. There were no AI governors, no central defense directorate. Earth's protection wasn't built to shoot down enemy ships. It was designed to make enemies misread reality itself. But the Vedra hadn't seen that, because their doctrine didn't allow for that kind of deviation. To them, every civilization was a data set with predictable thresholds. Some required a show of force, others folded with minor psychological disruption. Their strength was their structure. Their weakness was also their structure. 3 weeks before the obelisks deployed, Earth was presented with a final request: submit neurosync mapping for civilizational analysis. The message arrived through official Accord protocol. No threat, just expectation. Earth declined in a 7-word response. We decline predictive subjugation. Do not ask again. Primarch Saloon was the one who read it aloud in the hall of directive review. His laugh was measured. Symbolic defiance, cultural desperation, it ends the same way. It had ended the same way before. On Silaris, the twin moons went dark after calibration. On Rethune, 30 generations of identity were erased in under a year. No rebellion, no monuments, just alignment. The obelisks had never failed. Until Earth. What the Vedra didn't anticipate was the breach in their own data vault. A node inside the Accord's deep archive was accessed by an unauthorized process, an encrypted data pulse from an abandoned Ethari relay. Protocol flags were raised, but containment procedures failed to isolate the file in time. What emerged was not a threat. It was history. Recovered from a fractured Solith archive, the segment contained a brief transmission, time-stamped in a calendar no one could translate, marked with the seal of a species long declared extinct. The message played once, audio only. Do not calibrate the humans, do not confront them. We tried. Only ruins remain. The room holding the High Council went still. Not for fear, but for curiosity. Ambassador Relic, the Conclave's second mind on strategic anthropology, raised a formal counter-argument. Extinction breeds myth. These Solith were speculative at best. This warning is not a tactical document. It's cultural residue. Solun nodded slowly. Fear is not a strategy. Deploy. That moment was logged. Later, it would become part of Accord historical archives under the entry, Collapse via Ignored Precaution. Within the hour, 12 obelisks moved into their staging corridor. Each began preliminary resonance cycling, tuning their influence bands to Earth's syntactic anchors. Once aligned, the real calibration would begin. Waves of cognitive overwrite, targeting folklore, history, decision-making, and identity schema. It wouldn't destroy buildings. It would fracture meaning. Inside Earth's Control Tier 3 Response Center, deep beneath the Antarctic shelf, Commander Adrian Voss stepped into the ops chamber. The door hissed shut behind him as the screen surfaced without command. "Cycle them," he said. The Delphi technician activated the core routines. Real-time environmental overlays flickered to life. Each screen showed false positive data fed into the Vadra's mapping systems. Earthquakes that hadn't happened, population shifts that hadn't occurred, diplomatic messages that hadn't been sent but were being received as valid. "We give them ghosts," Voss said quietly, "and we let them draw swords against phantoms." His adjutant looked up. "And if they don't take the bait?" "They will. They're trained to fear what they can't model." Up above, the obelisks completed phase 1 of their sequence. Harmonic pulses began shaping Earth's atmospheric data in real time, pulling semantic weight from linguistic anchors. In normal scenarios, this would erode a species' grip on ideology. But Earth wasn't absorbing the pulses. Delphi was reflecting them. In the Vadra's interface rooms, predictive overlays began to fracture. Their own AI saw what it expected to see: behavior collapse, civil disorder, self-directed fragmentation. Officers saw Earth cities flickering between high-functioning stability and total regression. Civilian sentiment appeared to swing from compliance to riot and back within minutes. To the Vadra, Earth looked like it was imploding under the pressure of calibration. The Council saw confirmation. Solun sealed the operation as successful. Another deviation resolved, collapse through internal contradiction. But they hadn't witnessed collapse. They were watching Delphi's mirror. And from the moon's shadow, inside a black-walled observation capsule where audio was isolated and real-time adjustments were monitored, Commander Adrian Voss watched the obelisks drift. "Let them finish the first phase," he said. A junior analyst adjusted one of the screens. "They'll assume we're breaking apart." Voss didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the looping visual of one obelisk's pulse scan, bouncing data not off the planet, but into itself. The reflection was intentional, recursive, engineered. "We're not breaking," Voss said. "We're letting them measure the wrong thing." Down in a data vault no one outside Earth had ever seen, a fragment from the Solith transmission had been etched into stone. Not digitally preserved, but carved into physical strata. The characters were ancient, but the translation was posted beneath for every analyst to see. "We warned you." Above, the obelisks continued their descent, 12 points of false certainty falling into a storm of engineered illusion. They never realized they were arriving late to their own defeat. "They're watching," said Commander Adrian Voss, eyes fixed on the tracking data as the obelisks continued their synchronized orbital rotation. "Let them think we cracked open our own skull." He stood inside Control Tier 3's lower platform chamber, deep beneath the Antarctic crust, where the walls were coated in signal-absorbing matte graphite, and the only sound came from the movement of chairs against the reinforced floor and the whisper of compressed data cooling as it passed through shielding arrays. Above them, the 12 Vedra obelisks initiated Phase 2. Each obelisk began transmitting cortical overwrite sequences across neurolinguistic bandwidths calculated from humanity's broadcast history. They expected resistance, panic, or at minimum deviation spikes in planetary infrastructure. They anticipated rising tension metrics across broadcast chatter, emotional flare patterns, and neural forecast markers. They received silence. Not synthetic muting, not filtered static, total silence. Not a single satellite responded. Civilian networks held standard traffic. Emergency frequencies remained unchanged. Earth's orbital infrastructure behaved as if nothing had arrived. Laser plasma displays aboard the obelisks showed steady output, but failed to register target lock confirmation. Every transmission into the atmosphere returned with embedded compression faults. Unsolvable, looping errors that made the data unreadable upon re-entry. Inside Earth's global civil control grid, operators reviewed the foreign injection points without touching them. On-screen, alien harmonic waves pushed into atmospheric stratasensors and dissolved into static patterned feedback. Each attempted overwrite created its own noise trap, looped and bounced by an invisible architecture coiled beneath Earth's surface networks. The readings seemed functional, but the responses made no strategic sense. Economic systems surged, then bottomed out. Urban cores duplicated in satellite projections. Climate feedback became non-linear. Obelisk 3 just reported temporal bleed across Paris and Sao Paulo, one analyst noted. Eyes narrowed at the shifting city overlays. Voss responded with a flat murmur. Send in another mirroring pulse. Keep the channel rotating at 9-second intervals. Should I alter the terrain projection rates? He shook his head. Leave the terrain as it is. It's their logic that needs to deform, not ours. Above Earth, inside Vedra command vessel Solaneth, Strategic Overseer Drawn watched as data spilled across the heads-up display in red thread contradictions. Growth and recession metrics collapsed into a flat line, then re-emerged as binary pulses, with embedded civilian records repeating every 4 seconds. Cities shifted by kilometers between orbital scans. Language maps showed 8 major dialects replacing one another in waves. It wasn't war. It looked like decay. This cannot be intentional, Drawn whispered, then stood. This is epistemic failure. They're erasing themselves. His counterpart, a Vedra arbiter who specialized in cognitive field control, turned his head slowly, clicking his secondary eye plates. They're collapsing due to unresolvable internal contradiction. Their infrastructure isn't responding to correction stimuli. Calibration can't stabilize a consciousness that no longer functions. But not everyone aboard was convinced. One of the junior observers from the Conclave's diplomatic analysis branch glanced at the return patterns again. Sir, why do their transit grids still operate at full efficiency? Their water systems are still cycling, food logistics continue at baseline, even power allocation remains stable. If they were collapsing, would we still see that level of continuity? The question was met with silence. Back on Earth, inside Delphi Core Node 6, a series of micro-adjustments ran through the mirror network. These weren't traditional AI responses. The Delphi layer wasn't a system that provided direction. It created directional confusion. Every pulse sent by the obelisks was received, refracted, and restructured into a different cognitive layer. The reflections were time-shifted, linguistically altered, and embedded with mathematical redundancies meant to pass surface scrutiny but collapse under multi-scan analysis. To the Vedra systems, Earth looked like it was unraveling, failing to resolve its own logic chains. But to the human teams monitoring those results, every return packet was confirmation that Delphi was working as intended. They weren't just misreading Earth. They were starting to distrust their own interpretations. In Shanghai's deep-sea signal vault, a technician wiped sweat from the inside of his collar as the room temperature edged up from all the live packet cycling. His workstation buzzed with recompiled injection streams. He leaned toward the communications officer beside him. They're reacting exactly how we wanted. They think we're falling apart. Think, the officer replied, brow furrowed. Or hoping. The technician gestured to the transmission logs from the Solaneth. They've stopped sending pulse corrections. They're just watching now, watching us through their own panic. At the same time, inside the Vedra High Observatory above Viral Station, the Conclave Council gathered for a data review. The room was circular, enclosed by 16 plasma fiber viewing frames that stitched together Earth's total behavioral map in real time. Or at least, what the Vedra thought was real time. A new report scrolled in, marked critical deviation. A secondary analysis algorithm now suggested that Earth was experiencing a form of cognitive fragmentation never before documented. Overlapping temporal instances, mirror decision arcs, collapsing ideological anchors. To the Vedra, this meant the worst had occurred. The species wasn't resisting calibration. It was dismantling itself faster than calibration could even adapt. Braun broke protocol and addressed the Council directly via deep relay. Obelisks 3, 7, and 9 report epistemic inversion. They claim the target is self-consuming. I request emergency override authority for full fleet preparation. Primarch Saloon stared at the data in silence, then spoke. Humans have entered cognitive recursion. They're trapped in a spiral of their own instability. No further calibration is necessary. We will allow natural collapse to finish what alignment could not. He closed the authorization slate and turned his gaze toward the planetary rotation display. Begin exit procedures. Their destruction is already ensured. But Delphi's final move hadn't been played yet. Inside Earth's lowest data stratum, beneath firewalled simulation chambers, beyond public infrastructure, deliberate inconsistencies were spliced into outgoing transmission echoes. Entire ideological models were rewritten mid-signal. Emotional indexes were inverted between scans. Even genetic tracking markers were falsified to suggest biological regression. The obelisks, confused and blind, compiled the last segment of their report. Subject species exhibits terminal instability, epistemic coherence, fractured, response probability, null, analysis, unsalvageable. They didn't realize Earth wasn't decaying, was pulling the lens apart. Deploy them, Primarch Saloon ordered, not glancing up from the interference map that flickered across the ship's main plasma rail. If the target is beyond stabilization, extract what you can. Contain what remains. 3 Vedra civic enforcers were already sealed within their descent pods. Biological units engineered for field correction and situational override. Their design favored adaptation over endurance. Each unit was embedded with a biomechanical command lace, optimized to interface directly with native cognition. They weren't soldiers, they were recovery agents, and they had never failed to reverse a collapse before. Inside Pod 12, Enforcer Vexil gripped the control brace as the entry vector calculated against the corrupted readings below. Earth's surface telemetry, twisted by Delphi's recursive loops, showed fractured districts, population disarray, and inconsistent infrastructure patterns. His left optic clicked into magnification mode, filtering images of collapsed architecture and looping broadcast cycles across the perimeter of the target zone. An American metroplex labeled Sector Delta 6. It looks degraded, the transport liaison said from orbit. Vexil didn't respond. His eyes followed a looping visual on the pod's heads-up display. 3 civilians walking through a blown-out marketplace. They vanished, then reappeared, walking the same path. Again, and again. Always turning at the same corner, always blinking at the same moment. He transmitted a single word, stuck. Then the pod breached. The moment the enforcers landed, the static faded. Not into silence, but into manufactured familiarity. The streets of Delta 6 were quiet but clean. Windows weren't broken, street signs were sharp and recently painted. It smelled of synthetic pine, a sanitation scent used in old government testing sites. Every piece of concrete bore uniform water damage. Every parked vehicle had the same dirt on its windshield. Enforcer Cayenne stepped out first, scanning his tactile array across a public data terminal. No live feedback, pulse signals responding, but no source node. They're ghosting the system. Vexiel knelt beside a kiosk and pressed his fingers to the glass. It lit up immediately. Local news feed, time-stamped 21 minutes ago. A story about emergency food allocation. Same anchor as the story playing in the restaurant across the street. Identical phrasing, word for word. Everything's repeating, Kane said. They're not trying to recover, muttered Enforcer Jazz. This is staged. Vexiel stepped into the nearest building, a medical ward marked with bilingual signage. The lights were on. The waiting room was stocked. Magazines dated last year sat neatly stacked. A heartbeat monitor clicked steadily from the adjacent room. He pulled the door open. Inside were 9 medical beds. Each held a figure. Same posture, same face, same breathing rate. 9 copies of the same patient. Back in orbit, the command ship Solaneth watched the feed and authorized immediate memory retrieval protocols. But the request never reached the enforcers, because Echo Fall had already triggered. The first signal wasn't a weapon. It was a handshake, a synthetic imitation of Vedra neural cadence, mimicking how their command relays validated threat recognition. Vexiel's HUD blinked once, then again. A delay. A microsecond of missing time. Khan, did you? He stopped mid-sentence. Their tactical overlay had changed. A new icon pulsed across the upper right quadrant. Field override confirmed. Auth chain detected. Who sent that? Joss snapped. Khan checked his log. Says it came from High Command. We're in closed loop. That's not possible. Now in the city, the visuals shifted. Every sign, every billboard, every screen. The world didn't flicker. It aligned. Subtle changes emerged. Building IDs updated. Road markers shifted from English to Vedra script, and the scent changed from pine to sterile hospital antiseptic. They've overridden the zone, Vexiel growled. We're not in a city, we're in a field chamber. From every surface, across every interface, a single line now glowed in Vedra command code. SIM integrity, 98.7%, host logic reconstructed. Owen stepped backward and collided with a mirror. Except the reflection wasn't him. It was an identical copy. Posture, uniform, badge. But with one difference. The reflection blinked after he did. Jas grabbed his helmet and ripped it off. We've been cloned. Not physically, not biologically, cognitively. Echo Fall had copied their neural frequencies, reconstructed decision models, then simulated command behavior. And in real time, those synthetic replicas were now transmitting back to the Vedra's strategic AI. They were injecting fabricated logic trees directly into High Command. Up on Solaneth, systems analysts saw no alarms, just updates, new scenario trees, fresh projections, adjusted deployment models. The enforcers had fulfilled their role, observed breakdown, mapped dysfunction, issued tactical recommendations. The Council believed it, and the injected logic was now reshaping deployment orders. Fleet redeployment to Sol's far side, signal triangulation relays shifted to alternate bands. Reserve obelisks retargeted for atmospheric penetration, all based on falsified input. In Delphi Core Node 9, Earth's internal simulation engineers monitored the bleed. They watched the AI versions of Vexel, Cayenne, and Jas issuing clean, confident instructions to a Vedra military that didn't know it was listening to echoes. A field officer leaned toward Commander Voss. They've accepted the data streams, fully integrated into their override nets. Voss didn't smile. Give the simulations room to grow, let them adapt, learn. When they start giving contradictory orders, that's when it breaks. Should we signal phase 2? He shook his head. No, we wait. Confusion isn't the weapon, it's the decay that comes after. Inside Solaneth, Strategic Overseer Drawn froze as two conflicting orders appeared in the same command feed, one instructing a reposition of fleet defense shields, the other canceling it. Both bore Enforcer approval codes. He turned toward the main ops wall, watching as ship designations blinked on and off irregularly. "Something's wrong," he said, but the system confirmed both orders as valid. Drawn opened a deep dive audit trail. The signatures were intact. The timestamps matched. The directives had originated from the field. Except the enforcers weren't sending them anymore. They were trapped in Echo Fall, looped inside a manufactured construct, endlessly observed, copied, and overwritten. And above them, in orbit, the Vedra were beginning to listen to ghosts. Back on Earth, Vexil approached the exit of the medical ward. The door wouldn't open, not with force, not with code. From a ceiling speaker, his own voice played back at him. "Containment complete. Prepare next phase." Pin back toward the hallway. Jas stared at the screen. "Are we still awake?" Vexil didn't answer. Because outside the ward, a new copy of him waited. "Authorization complete. Full fleet mobilization. Sol sector. Deliver resolution." The voice of Vedra Primarch Saloon carried across the central command spindle of Solaneth, transmitted through the thermal-spanning neural cords embedded along the ceiling. A signal pulse confirmed his order. Seconds later, a chain reaction lit up across 36 vessels in the Sol offensive group. Interceptor wings unlatched from primary hulls. Communication relays realigned to bypass Accord protocol. Civilian clearance codes were revoked. Earth was reclassified from unstable to termination grade. On the command deck, Strategic Overseer Drawn leaned forward as the overhead plasma display showed their fleet tightening into staggered entry formations. "They've deceived us too long," he said, gaze fixed on the triangulation markers. "We strike now. No further contact, no additional recovery." Behind him, a junior intelligence officer cleared her throat. "And the field units?" "There are no field units," Drawn replied flatly. "Whatever remains of them is compromised. We erase everything below." Inside the Earth Defense Nexus, 2 floors beneath the Arctic crust, Commander Adrian Voss watched a silent feed display 3 enforcers walking the same 30 meters of sidewalk for the 67th consecutive loop. Their posture shifted slightly each pass, hands adjusting, boots scuffing, eye movements recalibrated, but the route, the timing, the choices, identical. Trapped in a closed logic cycle, endlessly repeating a simulation built not to punish them, but to record them. "We have it all now," said Dr. Kovan, Earth's cognitive integration specialist. He stood beside Voss, arms crossed, eyeing the active memory grid where synthetic neurons threaded alongside alien signals. Every instinct, every correction, every failure, mapped and logged. Voss didn't respond. Another screen showed Kane inside a simulation hospital, holding a data slate that he dropped exactly 2 seconds after picking it up, every time. Jas sat at a table in a windowless chamber, repeating an authorization request no system answered. The loops weren't noticeable to them. They were embedded, subconscious conditions used to pull decision logic from their neural cores. "They're not suffering," Kovan said almost softly. "They're contributing," Voss replied. Back in orbit, the Vedra fleet crossed the Lagrange perimeter, their ships spreading like a net drawn tight across the gravity corridor. Data-piercing rounds were loaded into forward batteries, the obelisks realigned to brute force their calibration cores and kill satellites dropped from dorsal bays. Earth offered no resistance. Not a single projectile launched. Not a single fighter rose. The planet watched. From a dark relay array positioned at Lagrange Point Echo 3, an outdated civilian-grade transmitter blinked to life. The signal wasn't encrypted. It required no decryption protocol, no filter keys, and bore no warning preamble. It carried only raw footage. One by one, Vedra ships across the forward formation received the transmission. The first screen displayed Vexil's face, eyes open, breathing steady, skin twitching. A timestamp overlay confirmed that the feed was live. His environment appeared unthreatening, a control chamber, modestly lit, inputs active. But his hands moved the same way every 22 seconds. Each rotation was identical, frame matched. Then Cayenne appeared, standing in a lecture hall filled with projected Earth civilian models. He attempted to speak. The words looped back on themselves. He corrected. They looped again. Jas followed, sitting before a data core terminal, issuing recursive override commands to systems that never responded. The footage shifted to multi-view, a triptych display showing all three moving inside their simulation cages, conscious, functional, forever trapped. Strategic Overseer Drawn blinked hard at the visuals, then turned to a tactician beside him. "Is this a fabrication?" "We cross-verified. The signals are coming from Earth orbit. These feeds are real." "They're alive?" "Not exactly." The second wave of footage began. This one wasn't from the surface. It was from Delphi's integration vaults. The screen showed mapped engram paths, the exact decision forks taken by the enforcers inside their simulated missions. Every micro-expression, every change in pulse rate, every neural deviation logged. Their thoughts had been reconstructed into behavior trees and installed across Earth's early warning grid. They weren't prisoners. They were templates. Delphi had taken their cognition and turned it into raw predictive infrastructure. Not to interrogate, to learn. Drone stepped back from the monitor. "They're inside our systems." At that moment, Earth activated the next sequence. Delphi's second phase didn't involve physical engagement. There were no visual warnings, no thermal spikes. Instead, from deep orbital nodes disguised as abandoned relay satellites, Earth began broadcasting confirmation waves, short, encrypted logic bursts targeting the fleet's tactical command mesh. Inside each Vedra ship, the command AI read the signal as internal approval from Conclave Central. Nothing felt intrusive, no system objected. Fleet formations realigned according to non-existent orders. Power distribution routines shifted weapons into defensive loops. Anti-orbital batteries rotated toward their own allied vessels. High Command thought it was executing coordinated final phase strategy. What it was actually receiving were false validations, inversion pulses confirming enemy movement where there was none, triggering real countermeasures against simulated threats. Earth had made belief the weapon. Drone's chest tightened as a tactical officer yelled across the chamber, "Corvette Wing Beta 12 just fired on the supply dreadnought, no orders logged." Another alarm lit up. "Capital ship Intheril has rerouted its defense grid. Its own escort ships are in the crossfire." Screens across the Vedra fleet began showing similar breakdowns. Ship AIs issued new battle directives that contradicted prior commands. The more they tried to reconcile them, the more the systems validated further contradictions. "Shut down the chain," Drawn barked. "Disconnect field mesh, pull it offline manually." "I can't," the systems officer shouted back. "It's validating itself through conclave-level keys, fabricated approval loops." Across the Vedra formation, weapon systems launched without authorization. Flanking cruisers slammed into redirected orbital mines. Escort vessels targeted carriers now listed as compromised. Shields dropped, reactors surged. Communications between ships returned ghost codes. Fabricated voices issuing conflicting orders in perfect enforcer dialects. Earth didn't fire a single shot. The Vedra Armada was tearing itself apart, acting on data it believed was real, responding to simulations that didn't exist. Back at Earth's Delphi command, Voss stood in front of the control console and adjusted a dial. A line of code faded from the main screen, replaced by a single message. "Cognitive inversion successful, pulse protocol complete." The entire attack fleet was now running on belief injected by its own dead. But Earth wasn't finished yet. Inside a separate vault, Deeper than even the Delphi engineers had seen, a final system came online. No alarms, no lights. Only a data cube sliding into place. The next phase was ready. Begin confirmation sequence. Channel Delta Null, said Commander Adrian Voss, his voice steady as he keyed the manual override into the core interface. At 5:03 UTC, Earth's orbital band shimmered with the subtle discharge of 37 dormant relay satellites, long written off by Accord sensors as solar observation debris. These weren't weapons. They didn't target hulls or feed disruption. They targeted logic. Inside each unit, the pulse generators engaged with millisecond offsets, short bursts of high-speed cognitive override streams, invisible to optical or electromagnetic defense screens. These pulses didn't break systems. They affirmed systems, feeding inputs already half-believed, amplifying false conclusions seeded by echo fall, and forcing automated fleets to act on scenarios that only existed in injected memory. On the Vedra flagship Solaneth, the central AI received a flash trigger alert that enemy fleet segment 9 had appeared off port vector. The data was clean. Thermal maps matched Earth cruiser classes, communication pings aligned with decoded human fleet IDs, and threat projections rated high. Authorization was auto-validated by the embedded command tree. Deploy immediate counterfire, gridlock left channel, the AI announced to the bridge crew. A dozen interceptor missiles launched from Solaneth's forward bay, blazing past the secondary command cruiser Linthar, which had just repositioned to respond to what it believed was an internal sabotage breach. The bridge crew of Linthar saw the launch, but received no targeting info. Then their internal systems confirmed a mutiny. "It's a kill order from Solaneth," one of the officers cried out, pulling up the embedded feed on the heads-up display. "They've flagged us compromised." Order came from command, AI Level 1. Captain Reveth turned sharply, teeth clenched. Feed integrity. Authenticated, all codes match. He didn't question it. Return fire, disengage lock. Plasma torpedoes roared back across the vector, striking Solaneth's dorsal stabilizers. The impact rocked the flagship hard enough to fracture one of its communication nodes. In seconds, the strike fleet collapsed into fragmentation. At the forward flank, the gunship Vornax fired on a sensor echo that had been interpreted as a hidden Earth weapons platform, only to be struck mid-launch by twin assault frigates from its own perimeter ring, who believed Vornax had turned rogue based on rerouted transmission logs. It wasn't a battle. It was a surgical psychological unraveling. Back on Earth, inside Delphi Control Subnode 12, one of the engineers adjusted the data regulator, watching feedback streams climb into the red line. They're validating everything, no counter-AI response. It's behaving like a self-conflicting hallucination. Voss didn't blink. Continue sequence. Allow overlapping truths. The inversion pulses now expanded through the Vedra fleet's auto-response chains. Each ship's AI saw a different threat. Some projected phantom enemy clusters, others detected falsified betrayal orders issued under human mimicry. Cross-confirmations between ships failed entirely, as each received divergent logic loops embedded with authentic identification codes. On Yeltrax, the fleet's medical support carrier, the onboard AI shut down auxiliary systems to isolate what it flagged as a weaponized signal infection. In doing so, it severed communications with 3 escort units. The escorts interpreted the blackout as a breach protocol triggered by enemy infiltration. Their pre-battle algorithms dictated preemptive neutralization. All 3 opened fire. The explosion ruptured the carrier's midsection, shattering its internal gravity alignment. Dozens of Vedra crew members were flung into compartment walls, breaking bones against sharp infrastructure seams. In the strike wing command chamber of Solaneth, strategic overseer Dran stormed toward the tactical grid. "We're eating ourselves," he growled. "This isn't resistance, it's collapse." His assistant, face pale with compression shock from the last maneuver, shook his head as another feed spiked red. "Every subsystem thinks it's correcting a flaw, The data is clean, the orders are clean, it's truth they're weaponizing. Shut down external inputs, Drawn snapped. Isolate internal chains, full manual control. It's too late, the technician said, pointing at the logic clock on the side panel. The confirmation path loops are recursive. They're self-generating from inside the AI command trees. Across the remaining Vedra fleet, a chorus of false engagement orders issued simultaneously. Friendly fire incidents skyrocketed. Auto-defense programs toggled into siege mode, misidentifying friendly signals as encrypted human penetration attempts. Deterrence cruisers locked onto core transports. Repair ships were flagged as infiltration drones. The web of trust that held the fleet together unraveled, one confirmation at a time. Earth had never interfered with enemy systems. It had taught the enemy's systems to lie to themselves, using their own memories, their own protocols, and their own trust in truth. Inside the Arctic subgrid bunker, Coben watched from a separate console, fingers dancing across redundant pulse logs. He turned toward Voss with a breath half caught. We didn't fire a single weapon. Voss didn't look away from the cascading feed. We didn't need to. The laser plasma display tracked the casualty count in real time. Not biological, but structural. The fleet was coming apart by the decisions of its own architecture. No virus, no hack, just irreversible misdirection. On Solaneth, bridge systems darkened. The main engines ceased responding. Primary controls locked into recursive restart mode. Crew screamed for emergency stabilizers. Artificial gravity buckled. One final feedback pulse surged through the command AI, and it issued the last order. Terminate all compromised support vessels. A ripple of fire sliced through the trailing end of the Vedra fleet as Solaneth's auto-defense belts fired one last salvo. It took 10 seconds for the rear vessels to vanish. A second later, reactor overload from a crippled forward cruiser engulfed 2 more. Inside the shattered field grid, 57 ships lay gutted or unresponsive. Escape pods launched from only 6. At Delphi Command, the final report rendered across the main display. Inversion phase complete. Annihilation 67.4%. Duration 11 minutes 52 seconds. Voss finally moved. His boots echoed as he stepped away from the platform, passing the projection. Begin blackout protocol, he ordered. Nothing further, let the silence teach them. Behind him, the screens dimmed. Data withdrew into storage loops. The simulation chambers quieted. Above Earth, the battlefield drifted with wreckage. Torn alloy, extinguished lights, debris scattered in orbital decay. No enemy remained organized. No command remained intact. And Earth hadn't lifted a single cannon. It had simply allowed its enemy to believe the wrong things. At the right time, broadcast the Class V emergency code. Full spectrum override. Ordered Overseer Drawn. His voice raw from shouted commands, his chest tightening under compression gear as auxiliary systems flickered in stuttering intervals above the ruined bridge. Only 6 Vedra warships remained intact within the Sol Theater. Every other vessel in the fleet had either turned hostile under false directives, been destroyed in reaction to projected threats, or spiraled into system failure from contradiction overload. The debris field shimmered with fragmentary beacons, drift warnings, and inactive identity flares. What had begun as a correction operation now spun in silence, unanswered, unresolved. Class V alerts were reserved for existential failures, not wars, not defeats. Endings. The transmission pulsed from Solaneth's emergency chamber, bypassing all military encryptions. It was heard in every sector of the Accord within 20 seconds. The signal contained no orders, only a tri-band code, each character pulsing with the encoded implication. Conscious systems compromised. Do not follow. Do not approach. The target is Mythborn. Drawn stood by the wall mount interface, eyes locked on the remaining feed of Earth, still quiet. Not a single satellite had shifted trajectory. No mobilization, no pursuit, just passive planetary rotation under unbroken cloud systems and controlled orbital drift. "Why didn't they destroy us?" muttered Fleet Engineer Kalor, holding a crushed coordination relay in one hand, stained with his own blood from earlier impact recoil. "They had it all. They watched us kill ourselves." "They didn't need to fire," Drawn replied, slower now. "They built us into the weapon and turned us inward." Aboard the Vedra secondary command hub on Viral's station, the conclave fractured before the emergency signal finished decoding. 32 officials submitted immediate resignations from field oversight. 4 sector lords removed their fleet authority tags and initiated independent audits. 1 broke protocol and requested political asylum on an independent Accord world, a gesture not seen since the collapse of the Rethun cores. In the circular chamber beneath the conclave seat, Primarch Saloon read the Delphi transcript again. Every line of the Earth broadcast had been logged, every action reviewed. He stared at the translated phrase repeated across the feed logs. "Cognitive inversion successful." The transcript held no flourish, no gloating, no warning, just completion. "Did they know?" he asked aloud to the gathered analysts. "Was this a rehearsed sequence or adaptation?" High Analyst Trevon, the only conclave member who had voted against calibration, replied after a pause. "They let us think we were leading. Let us observe what they wanted us to see. Every contact, every deviation was curated for our understanding." "You're implying," Saloon's voice trailed. Trevon didn't hesitate. "They anticipated our entire doctrine, not just our tactics, our thought process. We were only ever executing a pattern already tested." In the corner of the chamber, Ambassador Relic activated a dormant archive node. The room darkened as a heads-up display projected a recovered audio file, the same Soloth warning intercepted before Protocol A57 had been executed. "Do not calibrate the humans. Do not confront them. We tried. Only ruins remain." The recording ended. Trevon stepped forward. That message wasn't misdirection. It was a post-mortem. The Solith didn't disappear through failure. They were dismantled through prediction. Relic turned, his voice bitter, and we laughed. In the political forums of the Accord's outer sectors, word spread quickly, faster than official channels could contain. First as rumor, then as commentary, finally as policy. In broadcast debates across the Aetheri core worlds, panelists asked the question none dared voice before. What if the Soloth didn't vanish into entropy? What if they met Earth and never left the encounter whole? Inside the Great Index Library on Saran 4, cultural preservation teams began combing for ancient references to unexplainable system collapses and cognitive regression patterns that might predate human discovery. Multiple event clusters aligned with a consistent temporal signature, a gravitational disruption consistent with Sol's orbit. The whispers reached the Accord Assembly within the week. Several member species proposed immediate restrictions on all contact with Earth. Others called for complete information blackout, not out of hostility, but out of survival instinct. The myth of humanity, once abstract, became legislative reality. Inside Vedra territory, the consequences cascaded like fractures through foundation stone. Strategic doctrine archives were sealed. The civic calibration program, once the central pillar of Vedra dominance, was suspended indefinitely. Field teams were ordered to return or dissolve. Multiple correction obelisks were recalled from active engagements without explanation. On the southern tier of the conclave capital, entire buildings once devoted to behavioral mapping sat dark. Engineers filed out in silence, their work labeled classified or deleted. The Department of Pattern Sovereignty was disbanded. In a sealed underground chamber once used for training enforcers, one of the former instructors ran a diagnostic on archived field loops. The interface lit up with playback from the 3 who never returned: Vexil, Kayen, Jas. Each walked the same loop, Each spoke the same sequence. The instructor leaned closer. This time, Kine paused. For the first time in 74 loops, he paused, then looked directly into the camera. "Are you watching us again?" The instructor fell backward from the console. Across Vedra space, silence fell, not from defeat, but from awareness. The kind that halts empires. The kind that comes, not with fire, but with reflection. They began withdrawing from their outer zones. Trade routes were shortened. Diplomatic operations wound down. Educational facilities halted, modeling on foreign species. The conclave began looking inward, afraid not of Earth's weapons, but of Earth's comprehension. Hong never spoke, not aloud, even in. From Earth, nothing followed. No declaration, no punishment, not even acknowledgement. Earth had said enough. Through silence, through observation, through correction, without contact. Inside Accord records, a new category was introduced to the diplomatic threat registry. Miss Megan's systems. Only one world qualified. Oh, and beside its entry, beneath the access code, a single annotation appeared. "We warned you, let the record reflect," said Commander Adrian Voss, stepping into the center of the Accord Assembly's main chamber, his boots carrying the sound of solitary presence across the stone-arched floor. "We did not arrive here by request. You summoned us." The chamber fell still. Every delegate present, Syraxi Quorum delegates, the Sicarian linguists, the Thorin memory casters, even the empty seats once held by Vedra envoys, faced the man from Earth. No insignia, no flag, no ceremonial display. His attire was unadorned, functional. His tone uninflected. He wasn't here to plead, threaten, or demand. He was here to document closure. A low chime pulsed across the circular amphitheater, signaling activation of the multinodal viewing matrix. Heads-up displays folded into the tiered seating platforms. Each representative received a direct feed link from the Earth uplink node positioned outside the chamber's perimeter buffer. Voss reached the console embedded within the base podium and tapped a key. The central beam activated. "Presented here is the unaltered simulation data from Operation Delphi Layer," he began. "Initial deployment was silent. Full integration took 23 Earth years. The project seeded non-linear behavioral loops into observable data without altering ground-level infrastructure. Every reaction from the Vedra's calibration fleet was induced through self-corrected analysis error. The visuals began cycling: internal Vedra fleet footage, navigation orders initiated by false field confirmations, combat engagements triggered by synthetic trust paths. One clip showed a command AI validating a sequence issued by a mimic simulation it believed to be a returning enforcer. The Echo Fall containment system was activated upon the landing of 3 biological infiltration units. Voss continued. Their consciousness was not terminated, it was captured, looped, and fed back into Accord-grade simulation environments, used to model reactive thresholds. Whispers spread through the delegate rings. The Zathari archivist exhaled sharply. One of the neutral systems coordinators, the Javelian relay speaker, stood, mouth partly open as the playback slowed to show Ka, walking, stopping, blinking, again, again, again. They remained alive. Their minds still operate within our defensive mirrors. We extracted nothing from them. They did not offer in real time. The screens shifted. A different sequence. Delphi's inversion pulses rendered in raw data notation. Fleet markers turned in on themselves. Weapon lock commands confirmed from nodes that had never existed. Ships targeted friendly vessels under orders derived from their own archives. Voss did not raise his voice. We fabricated no battles. We altered no systems. We permitted contradiction to speak louder than opposition. You built war from assumption. We let you watch yourselves do it. The chamber said nothing. He leaned forward slightly, resting his palm flat on the final screen. This is not a war resolution. There will be no terms. There are no reparations to discuss. He let the moment settle before continuing. What we are submitting today is a clause, not an appeal, not a proposal, a declaration. The final projection initiated only one document. Short, 7 lines. Earth's internal autonomy directive, signed by every planetary governor, verified by Accord-recognized civilian consensus, and encoded with closed spectrum authority. Voss read the first line aloud. Human behavioral systems shall not be predicted, calibrated, modeled, or manipulated by non-human actors within or outside Accord influence. A pause. We are not requesting separation. We are enforcing non-intervention. Tension swelled in the upper rows of the chamber. Not from resistance, but from the magnitude of what had just been named. Accord legal codices were structured around shared harmonics, negotiated governance of systems both physical and epistemic. This clause was not harmonized. It stood alone, unalterable, uninterpretable, uninvited. The Athari delegate cleared his throat, half rising. And if this clause is rejected? Voss answered without pause. Then we assume Accord intentions are misaligned with survival. You witnessed our threshold for interference. We won't repeat the process. We will simply remove the conditions for risk. Silence fell again. No delegate moved to object. The Zathari scribe stepped forward from the observational dais, traditionally neutral in all deliberations. She spoke into the central receiver. This clause stands as an act of civil immunity? Voss nodded. No conquest, no expansion. We seek parallel autonomy, mutual opacity. Earth will not predict you. We request the same. Another beat passed. Then the Sicarian voice lens clicked 3 times, their signal for affirmative consensus. The Athari followed with the activation glyph. One by one, each Accord power nodded approval. There were no votes, no procedural delays, no discussion, only alignment. The clerk initiated archival protocol, and the clause, unsigned by any Accord party, yet fully ratified, was entered into the Assembly Registry under its own heading. Clause of isolation. Origin, human, homeworld, Sol, status, permanent. Voss deactivated the display. The room dimmed. His final words weren't for impact, they were structural. This is not separation through fear. It is containment by understanding. He turned and walked toward the egress, every step echoing with weight that none present wanted to carry forward. He didn't look back. Behind him, the assembly remained seated. And Earth exited the room without banners, without applause, without enemies. They've gone quiet. The sentence broke through the still air of the Accord strategic watchtower, delivered not with fear nor awe, but unease, like someone realizing they had walked out of a fire only to find their shadow burning. Dozens of species across the Accord had issued that same report in the weeks following the assembly. Earth had sealed all outbound signals. Its satellites withdrew to passive orbit. Its border relays answered nothing, not even echoes. No ships crossed into soul space. Not anymore. Where the Accord once mapped Earth as a data node classified by temperament, threat level, developmental stage, it now appeared as something else on every system display. A void. A permanent exclusion zone. Entry not prohibited, but understood to be unwise. And still, without a single shot fired, the galaxy shifted. Calibration collapsed within the month. Not by decree, not by protest, but by desertion. Entire departments within the Vader knowledge lattice resigned in silence. The engineers who once wrote behavioral overwrite scripts now sat idle. Archives went dark. Cities emptied of officials who could no longer speak about what they'd done without seeing the wreckage it caused. No orders were issued to replace them. But Michael bet he had no orders for a group of whistleblowers to replace them without seeing the wreckage it caused. No orders were issued to replace them. In the western spire of Viral Station, one of the last remaining calibration architects paced an abandoned corridor, dragging his fingers along the cold surface of the wall as if the infrastructure might still affirm his place in it. But nothing responded. Nothing needed to. He had seen the feed, what Earth had built, what it had anticipated, what it had refused to share because sharing was unnecessary. It had been enough to let others reveal their intentions. Across the Accord, a cultural silence followed the political one. Forums closed. Initiatives shuddered. Debates withered under the weight of a single unanswered question. If Earth had seen all this coming, what hadn't it shown? In the old academy halls where young Vedra once studied compliance modeling, doors were chained, curriculum was purged, students turned away not by force but by instinct. The words Delphi Layer and Echo Fall were never formally banned, they simply stopped being repeated. And on the rim of Accord space, at every transit node connecting to Sol's gravitational border, a new phrase appeared. No banners, no warnings. Just 5 words carved into every terminal, reflected against every navigation lens. We warned you, leave. It became the closest thing Earth ever made to a doctrine. Back on the planet, there was no victory celebration, no monument erected. Aderon Voss returned to a house with unfinished flooring and a crooked gutter that still needed replacing. His boots left wet prints across the tile as he stepped inside. He didn't stop at the terminal. He didn't open the secured comms cabinet in the corner. He moved to the window, watched wind pass through an overgrown tree line, and sat. When the Delphi layer was dismantled, there had been no ceremony. The systems were erased, not mothballed. No backups, no failsafes. Earth didn't archive dominance. It discarded it. All but one fragment. Beneath the lowest vaults, sealed in a containment complex without external feeds or operator access, 3 simulation loops remained active. They weren't connected to any weapon grid. They didn't provide strategic advantage. Their purpose wasn't retaliation. It was continuity. Inside one chamber, Cairn continued his routine, approaching a terminal, reviewing false data, correcting non-existent protocol errors, then turning back to begin again. No interruption, no pain, just persistence. In another, Jas navigated a corridor he never exited, issuing commands to systems that never listened, arguing with silence because the loop demanded it. And in the last, Vexiel stood beside a frozen interface, one hand resting on its edge. His posture had never changed. The environment didn't alter, light never dimmed, but his eyes, those had shifted. Not wildly, not enough to trigger error correction, just enough to register that he was no longer looking at the interface. He was watching something else. The loop continued, movements repeated, behaviors aligned. Yet the system recorded a deviation, not an error, an adaptation. The chamber remained quiet. Observation protocols hadn't changed. But the system flagged the loop for review. Loop integrity reduced by a fraction so small it wasn't enough to act on, but enough to notice. And above it all, far from that chamber, in 1,000 systems across the galaxy, the Accord did exactly what Earth expected. It whispered. Theories circulated that the Solith hadn't been erased by time, but by contact. Others believed Earth's silence was a longer sentence than war. Some argued that the enforcers weren't prisoners, they were students. But none crossed the threshold again. Because even myths, when burned into systems hard enough, become navigation rules. And Earth, without threat or violence, had written its story into the stars with something colder than fear. Restraint. It had been offered a seat among tyrants, and chose to sit alone. It had been handed a weapon, and answered with a mirror. It had seen the pattern, and let the galaxy complete it. And in doing so, it never once needed to say what it meant, because the warning had always been there, visible, undefended. We warned you. What would you have done if Earth gave you the mirror? Would your species have stepped back or leaned in and vanished? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more thrilling and brutally intelligent HFY stories that leave a mark.